Thank you so much for coming back. Greatly appreciate it. We continue to appreciate your commitment to this committee. So we are in the second to our last meeting for this committee in terms of development. So it's the second meeting in development. And tonight, we're going to go through a bunch of stuff. First, we're going to do a super high-level 5-minute review of this is the stuff you've been seeing ad nauseum over the last multiple meetings. But we'll give you a real high level just to kind of spark your memory of that. We'll share back with you for about 5 minutes some of the findings that came out of our last meeting. You may recall the exercises you participated in. If you didn't, you'll see them again here real quick. And then we're going to jump right into the first of 2 rounds of kind of a prioritization exercise for tonight. And we'll give you quite a bit of time. You can see there's a bunch of time associated with actually doing the work and then reporting back out to the group. We'd like to give you some opportunity to really have some discussion around the exercise. We'll take a quick break. We'll have a group discussion of prioritization round 1. And then we'll dive into the second round of the prioritization. And then we'll talk about our next steps. Yeah. So here we are. We're in our second of 3 prime development meetings, which is great. We're making good headway. And we just had a board meeting like a week ago, I guess. 2 weeks ago. And Joanne participated in that. She'll be coming in shortly. And I think it went well. So that's good. Our objectives for tonight are to begin to prioritize district need over time, which is really starting to understand after now that you see this need, what, if any, type of projects might need to happen, and most importantly, kind of what sequence, and some of your rationale behind any proposals you might make. And then the second thing we want to do is really begin to understand the shorter term implications of some of your longer term thinking. Okay? And this will be, I think, much clearer once we kind of get you into the exercises themselves. Okay, quick 5-minute review of needs. You remember our 3-day buckets. You can probably go home and recite that with your families by this point in time. You remember that we opened the first sort of meeting with a discussion about educational programs in the district, with a high-level overview of some of the programs that are really going on here and what the implications might be. The second bucket, you may remember capacity and enrollment. And for this one, it's a sort of supply and demand exercise, really trying to understand that I call it basically like this chart, how many seats you have in the district at different grade levels, and how that relates to the projected enrollment over 10 years for the district. And you may remember that big picture here was that this didn't appear to be a huge driver or big concern, at least in the next 10-year horizon. After that, no one knows for sure looking at that crystal ball, but it's something to think about. The third bucket was facility condition. So you probably remember there was an assessment that was completed looking at the condition of facilities, and all of the facilities based on that assessment are really sort of in the fair range, generally not too bad, although associated with this kind of high-level facility condition index number, we had also shown you a little more detailed breakout of some of the specific systems at each building, and have noted that if you looked at all these, that just generally overall, Islander Middle School would appear by systems, all the systems, and the scoring community and the most needy or worst condition followed by Island Park in West Mercer, and then shortly behind that, is Lake Ridge. And recognizing the kind of specific system needs that were identified by the third-party assessment field, those are the groups that those two facilities, Crest and Lake Ridge. We talked a little bit about the age of facilities, and at least in your mind, how long, where is the member that you expect them to last over time, and that sort of varies from individual. The blue line, you probably recall, was the last major renovation, the number of years was the last. So it's those renovations. There. And also as part of facility condition, just recognizing, and we're not picking on Islander by any means, to describe it sort of every one of the schools has a list of line items that have been identified by the district that they are tracking specifically regarding maintenance or other types of needs. So we want to make sure you understood that. Facility condition also involves educational adequacy, not just are things in good condition or falling apart, it's how well they are supporting your educational programming. And one of the metrics you may recall us to do with the gross square feet per student at a given site. And this chart was really comparing where you're at the different grade levels relative to national medians at each grade level, elementary, middle school, and high school. And it's not to say that every school that you have needs to be at these national medians. The main point was just sort of to underscore what some of those differences actually mean in terms of education per student. And one case we've shown was that this differential, which is on the order of about over 20 square feet or so, really equates to having a gym at that elementary level plus an additional 5 to 7 square feet per student, which could provide the classroom. Not only this facility right now. And that as part of that educational advocacy, we had an opportunity to go around to each of the facilities, two of them talk with the principals, and they had identified a list of things that they would say might be areas of improvement programmatically at each of the schools. And they were not picking on Highland Park Elementary School. We did this for every school in the district. Okay, high level overview of needs. For our last meeting's findings, you may recall that we went through an exercise, the first of which was asking you to go back and either verify or perhaps even rethink the original goals that you had identified related to this project. Now that you had an opportunity to learn much more about the condition of them and hear from different parties, including the district, and you went through an exercise where you placed dots on what you currently might think is your three most important. For those of you who want to see them in detail, we summarized all of that over there. It's hanging on the wall. And those goals now reflect your most current thinking and prioritization of goals. Read that we also did kind of a comparative summary of the top dozen goals. And it's interesting when you look at it to see how you sort of shifted a little bit now that you've sat in the room and thought about it. And I think a good way to read this chart, this is all, it's not already posted on the website, it will be very soon, is to look at where you were last meeting now, currently, and how things have changed. So adaptability moved from position number 4 to position number 1. CCR moved all the way from position number 9 to number 2. So there were some significant, that's college and career readiness for those of you who never know. And then there were a few new ones that weren't even on sort of the top 12 list. And you started showing up through your now thinking about goals and objectives with more of a background. So that's what is now captured over there on this comparison chart. We also asked you, in light of the goals, more particularly after having looked at the goals you had before and then adjusting them if you felt necessary, to think about each one of your facilities and whether or not, in your opinion, they were in alignment with the goals that you have stated for facilities and how to support education. And this is how you assess them, basically. So here are your dots. Each one of you sort of place a dot on one of the facilities, and you can kind of very quickly start to see where there may be areas of efficiency you might turn it. And then, of course, in the newer facility, wood, and in the newer building, they're in good shape. And then some are different. So that, I think, is a good way to sort of see what the group is thinking relative to the goals and objectives you identified. And then we ask you these high-level questions, which is essentially thinking about, okay, if you think it's a longer term, in your best opinion, does it make more sense to sort of keep taking care of the schools you have in light of all of their needs and their ability to support them, or is in fact thinking about possible replacement a direction that you think is more appropriate? And we ask questions at each grade level, and you went through an exercise where you discussed and sort of, admittedly, a little bit better than on the fly, but had a chance to discuss it and sort of put your flag in the sand, so to speak. And this is really the outcome, is that elementary school replacement was really preferred by the majority of the overall committee. There were certainly groups that were not quite so sure, and our understanding was part of that discussion was really tied to not having a lot of clarity between the relative costs between a fully modernized facility versus to replace that facility. And that's understandable, sort of maybe not so clear because that information is not out there yet. At the middle school, we asked you whether or not, we stated that the district had done previously some a little bit of exploration into the possible replacement of the older buildings that are still existing at the middle school. And we asked you whether or not you felt that was an approach that made sense, or whether it made more sense to modernize those buildings. And you can see sort of where you landed as a group with that. Almost everyone, not quite, sort of landed over replacement. And then at the high school, we asked you whether or not any work that might be done there at some point should really focus on primarily modernization from the standpoint of fixing things that need to be repaired over time, or does it make more sense in your view to go beyond that and really start addressing programmatic issues that have been identified in high school, which there are a number. And we had sort of said at that point that we took off the table, which you could challenge that offer was put out there. The idea of the likelihood of replacing the high school is relatively low. Nobody really pushed back and said, hey, no, we should replace the high school, although pretty much everybody kind of landed in the same spot with regard to the approach to modernization, which is to really focus on educational adequacy of programmatic components, and of course, view this piece where you're fixing systems on an as-needed basis when they're really at a point where they need to be replaced or helped in a big way, but to really, yes, address these kind of programmatic areas. Crest, we asked about whether or not there was support for expansion or improvement of the programmatic areas beyond simply fixing problems at the building, just sort of repairing problems at the building. And there was, as you can see, a lot of support for addressing those programmatic issues, including issues of capacity, possibly creating a little bit bigger building. And in fact, there was a number of discussions about really the approach to that being moving press, not doing it in the same building, the existing building necessarily. And if that program were relocated, to really consider carefully its proximity to the high school and also some of the key programs associated with high school. And CCR was one that was sort of talked about quite a bit, while in that we maintain a certain level of image directly associated with press as its own entity. Okay. Does that kind of generally ring true with what your recognition or memory discussion was? Okay. So, round one prioritization. We're going to start, now that most of you have finished, by, yes?
Did you want to go back and talk a little bit on that spectrum exercise about Lake Ridge?
Sure. Yeah. One thing that we noticed, and I'm sure you all noticed it as well, is there was a group of folks who thought about Lake Ridge in a way that was different than the other two schools of similar age, namely Highland Park and West Mercer. And when we looked at it, we were curious about what some of the thoughts or what caused people to place their sort of vote in their location for Lake Ridge in that spot. And I think it'd be a good thing for us to kind of learn from you with regard to some of the thinking that caused you to do that. And I don't know if anybody who might have put their thoughts there would like to share with everybody. And we're not saying it's wrong thinking at all. It's more of a curiosity thing. Yeah.
I can't actually remember where I put my sticker for Lake Ridge, but one thing that I do generally think is it's situated on the site situation seems to be more like where I would imagine it should be versus especially Island Park and possibly West Mercer. So I can't speak to the condition of the building, but in terms of where it's situated on the site, it makes more sense to me from my experience going there.
I can see that. Yeah. Anybody else who may have thought about Lake Ridge in the middle zone at all? Sure. The question here is how many parents or folks here may have a child or a grandchild at Lake Ridge? 2, 3. Okay. Okay. All right. So, no other thoughts on that?
There is a lot of gifted and talented programs. I think there's a perception.
So maybe.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think folks can make it that there are a number of programs that explain transition programs. A number of programs at Lake Ridge. Yes. Yeah, not so much from facilities, but from a programming standpoint. It's like sort of saying programming standpoint, that's a good thing. And it's possible that we talk less about the condition of the facility, but what's going on there, and so the success of the related program. Yeah. This thing one? No? Okay. Okay. All right. Going. Okay. All right. So, round one prioritization. We'd like to randomize you guys a little bit. And so we'll do the same sort of shtick that we did last time where we do 5 tables. And so we'll just count off 1 to 5 and then find yourself at tables 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just move to those tables. So starting at round table 1.
5, 1, 2, 3,
4, 5.
1, 2, 3,
4,
5, 1, 2,
3, 4, 5.
1.
All right. So find your table, please. Yeah, we'll get you all mixed up.
We're here today.
Really? Now that you're at your tables, one of the sheets on your table is a sign-in sheet that is specific to that table, your group. If you could start signing in, it's turned upside down because I didn't want anybody to sign into it. You can all sign in as your table group.
Oh, good.
All right. So I'm going to give sort of a little 5 minutes intro. All right. So people are all here. No. So the first thing,
I know there's
to
some
sort of set the stage or the mindset for what this exercise is about. And some of you may remember this diagram from probably one of our first meetings. And the diagram is really intended to kind of show the 3 basic approaches to managing facilities, really anywhere, but certainly at a school district. The first one of those is sort of a piecemeal Band-Aid approach, which is really when you don't have a plan. And you just sort of do things, not quite ad hoc, but in a reactionary way. The other end of the spectrum is you understand what the need is, and you fix everything once that's smooth. And we talked about before, nobody ever does that because it always exceeds what is a reasonable amount of resources to accomplish that, no matter where you are. It's a big body to try and take on. So what that does is it forces us really into this middle zone, which is really what the long range plan is, and it's really what we're asking you to start thinking about this evening. A strategic phase approach, which is all about prioritization. You have to prioritize what thing or things make the most sense given what you've seen in terms of need first, what should go first for whatever reason, which you're going to tell us, and so forth and so on. So that's really what we're doing tonight, taking a stab at that. And on your desk, I'm going to kind of walk you through what you're going to find at your desk. So when is your sign-in sheet? Sign into those, if you will. You're going to see a chart like this, which is basically identifying a number of sequence prioritized projects, we'll call them. Number 1 is obviously your first priority. You're going to see a little printout like this, which is a bit hard to read. The text is small, but it is outlining the gaming pieces that you also see on your table put together. And these under each of the gaming pieces is a brief description of projects that might be contained within a gaming piece. It's not saying they all are contained, but it gives you sort of a feel of similar projects at a given facility. facility that could be contained within. And we also have a larger copy in the back, if you want to take a look at that. The larger gaming pieces are, because the last go-round, there was such a big discussion and a lot of boxes being checked in the placement approach and the longer-term, long-range planning approach. These are essentially big box replacement pieces over the long haul, the bigger projects. As is this big box, which is Crest, okay, and these two big boxes, which are the pool and the admin building, okay. You will also notice that for Crest specifically, we made a second alternative for Crest. We also made a smaller box for Crest. And the reason we did that is as you start doing prioritization and talking about these things, you will be able to discuss which one of these two approaches makes the most sense to you. I'm not going to tell you specifically why you do it this way, because you're going to figure it out probably. But ultimately, you're going to pick one or the other. And there are a series of smaller projects here. I say it's smaller, but that doesn't mean they're not important. And they are those programmatic high school projects that you see listed. That's why they're not big. There are a whole series of programmatic pieces that in scale are much smaller in scale than a full replacement. So for the first exercise, we're going to ask you, there's a dashed line on this, we're going to ask you to focus and work with all of the gaming pieces to the left of this dashed line. And to just give you a peek into this, but don't worry about it right now. We'll be talking about these gaming pieces later on the right side of the dash line. So don't really worry about those pieces. Focus on these pieces. If I miss anything, please let me know for sure. You'll also find on your table just some background information. These are the summary need sheets that you just went over. So if someone says, wait a minute, what was the condition of this building and what were the condition of this? You have this information on the table.
And the goal summary is on the back.
Oh yeah, so here's that goal summary too if you want to take a look at that. And for those who, in the time that we have, we need to go even deeper, we do have one copy of each of the issue papers back here as well. So if you felt like you needed to go a little bit deeper than what is provided, you can actually ask us or you can go into the paper as well. So those are the pieces. They're gaming pieces. What we're going to have you do is we're going to have you position these gaming pieces. They're tape dots on your desks here on your tables. And ultimately, after you've positioned all these in the spot you think they should be, we'll have you take them down, and then we're going to put them up on the wall. So let's walk through this. Okay, so here are your pieces. You're going to be working with these pieces, not the ones on the right-hand side. There are ground rules that, like any game, you gotta have to play by. So we'd like you to start by taking 5 minutes to just sort of review the programmatic improvements that might fall within each one of these boxes. Just kind of quickly scan them over to, I would spend probably more than 5 minutes or so. You're going to take the colored pieces that you have in that split piece, and you're going to place them on the timeline in order of your group's prioritization. And we said use other white pieces if needed. So I don't know, are those somewhere? Do we have those? Okay, yeah. So if there's something that we missed that you think needs to be included in there and prioritized, whatever it may be, you might not have been talked about before, but you want to share it with everybody else, then you can write on that piece of paper and include it in your prioritization. Ultimately, you're going to be using only one of the CREST options. Okay, large or small, not both. And this is really important. Larger gaming pieces, so these are the pieces here, and these three cannot be stacked. So you can only place one of those on a given prioritization position. Smaller gaming pieces, like the high school pieces, the small crest, or ATV, can be stacked up to 4 high. Okay, so you can stack those pieces up to 4 high. The bigger ones you cannot stack.
But can we stack a big and a small?
No, you cannot. It can only be big or a series of small. Okay. Below each gaming piece, after you have put the gaming piece on the line, we would like you, and this is after you discussed it and you've all agreed, okay, we all agree, right? This one's going to go in number 1, or this stack is going to go in number 1. We'd like to very briefly have you write why you put that where you're putting it. Just a few word summary, like a 3 or 4 word bullet point that you'll be able to share back out with the group. Okay, and after that's done, after you complete this, we're going to pin these up on the wall, keep them up on the wall. A representative from your group will share out the gist, the big picture of what you have done. So this is what it'll look like, sort of diagrammatically. Let's say if you put a big one in this location, we're not saying you have to do that. That's what you get. And you say, oh, and the 3 reasons or the 2 reasons we put this specific thing there is this and this. This is why we did this. If you put stacked pieces and you go up to 4 with a smaller stack, this is why we put those things there. That's the decision, the rationale for the next. Is that making sense to everyone so far? Great. Okay, so you've got 5 minutes to review the programmatic improvements. We're giving you 40 minutes to discuss the prioritization, to place the gaming pieces here and tape them down with a little tape out so they stay when we put them vertical, and to write down in some very brief notes the rationale of why. And after that 40 minutes, we will be asking you as individual groups to have someone share out, after we tape it up, the big picture of why you've done what you've done to everybody else. We'll take a break, then we're going to come back and want all of you to have a brief discussion. You can ask each other questions or whatever happening. Okay? All right. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to use some data from this for last.
Yeah.
The action today, right? Let's say we say we want building A replaced and building B replaced. We all agree on that, right? And then we go and we try and get funds to like do it. What's the next step after that? Is then we say, okay, let's break it down into smaller items.
Well, at this point in time, what I would say is there's been in this room sort of a very conscientious disconnect between going out and trying to get resources for projects. What we're really trying to understand is more about what would drive the projects from your standpoint, your community input. Because there's all this big pile of stuff,
Right.
and we're very curious about, of this big pile of stuff, what is the sequence that you think is most important as community members? And at some point in time, what we don't know is how big of a bite they'll even be. That, the bite may be this big, and the bite might be more than that, and we can but we're not even talking about this at this point. Okay.
So at our table last time, we talked about the admin building being co-located with students. So at any particular school, just to help finance that, is the district open to having it co-located with an elementary school or with the middle school, or does it have to be standalone? I think that would be helpful for us to know going in. Can you, build a little extra
I wouldn't
space?
be able to, answer that. But what I would say is this, for what it's worth, is I think it would be most interesting and useful for those people who felt strongly about that to take one of the pieces of white paper or whatever and note that and advocate for putting it on the list. And then the most important thing is the why. Jot some notes down. And it's not to say, I should say, by the way, I said this at the beginning of this whole thing, no promises are being made here at all. This is really an information gathering exercise to try and tap into your thinking as community members, which is huge. It's like very, very important. And so that would just be one more thing to tap into.
So is the crest in the admin building the dark ones, so bigger, middle, it's like this?
The crust twin is,
What is that?
no, that's a big block.
So that's a big block too. So that's like the island part of West.
Yeah, the only little ones
Oh, yeah.
are these, these small ones.
So in this planning, we couldn't plan for combining like the theater with crest and admin items because we have to plan them all out separately. You're saying this is a big block.
Yes.
Each one is its own separate.
And part of the rationale behind this is these are big blocks, right? And so you know they're bigger projects. And so in light of the question around what is a reasonable sort of bite at the apple, so to speak, it's better to not try and fill the bucket too full in terms of a big project and a number of little. So if, for example, you put a big project down, like our graphic back there, and then 4 projects, smaller projects right behind it, that is not to say that those couldn't in the end be combined. And your rationale for doing that, you would be telling us why you picked the specific small projects that could do that, right? May or may not be combined, but what we now know is what your priority is, the sequence, and why, which is really what this is trying to get at.
One question. So we have 1 through 14 on the scale here.
Yeah.
Is that representative of anything other than priority? Because there's not 14 individual projects that fill those in.
Right, yeah.
Fill all 14 boxes.
Well, that's a great question. And I would say there's no magic to 14 at all. We sort of did a quick calculation, like if you stretch things out, including the stuff to the right of this line, which you're going to do next, you're going to need a number of these boxes. We don't know if it's all 14. So, yeah.
Should we skip boxes at all, or should we just?
No, don't skip any boxes.
Okay.
And in fact, if you decide, oh, we're going to really stretch it out, and for some reason only one project, you could probably stack them out here too and tell us why you're doing that. Okay. Any last questions before we turn you loose? For 45 minutes. All right. So for yeah,
Put two of them. Put two of them.
And I just think this was
The most people
And it was such a slow process. Literally,
like she'll give me files organized I feel like
you could have a project.
like the stuff you were doing last week.
We've already done a big
chunk pile.
No, it's another big chunk to take out to get
Your mountain
to show the commitment. Yeah. I also think that as we start getting in, and I know that there's a lot of formative learning and training and stuff like that we're being underserved. But I think I really like the, I feel like we got a pretty good campus and some of these smaller projects I'm starting to augmenting. But if we do this, this serves the most, the biggest portion of the community.
But I'm just saying, like,
Something really look forward to in school. So you will be selling.
I think it's a big feeling that my kid in particular just started to get into I think watching the big model last time sort of brought it up and you drive by and really see what's possible. And then you go into the sixth grade wing and you go and sort of see what you're doing. And you know, it's certainly working at some level. It's the fact that it's questions and feel like that and still have this looking forward. So I probably, even knowing we just put a big
I'm going to say something obvious here, which I know all of you probably already recognize, but I'll say it anyway. The farther something is down the line, the longer you will wait for it to happen. Obvious, but I want to say
Put on my smoke.
You gotta start it.
My friend.
That's what I tried to get. How many people working at? Is it 20 people or 10 people?
It took minutes on that. Great.
Yeah.
But you know, if we're gonna go.
Well, I think you could order them, stack them with order
expansion section.
and then raise
I think that
Right. Start from about 75
We've always Roofs is a big one. Well, probably which one would be the easiest?
Well, I still
Like, what can you take one of that back of the center stuff? Can you take off and make it faster? Sort of that small, tack it on. And they're saying this one has less room potentially for some density changes a lot.
But I kind of opened my mouth and started looking at you. She couldn't have smart. I mean, she was serious. Way too much credit over here.
From 100% era, you know, field.
There is, yeah.
I think square footage also is much it is a selling point. And it's big equity.
Yeah. So above the small ones, page 4. Which is what you're trying to get to share.
That's good. And I think that's, to my point, that's the kind of thing that building has some opportunities where it might be simpler to do some of those, re-roof and augment that stuff in a minor shorter term way. And the other building is actually pretty simple. It's right there, it's all fine, it's a flat site. It's in the center down, which means it's on good solid dirt. Because it's not in the west, a lot of from my experience working, building houses in those areas, it's like that ridge down the middle. I would, from my experience in all three, I'd probably prioritize on part. Yes. Separate.
So both.
But they won't do this. When they do it.
So one big one is
So
the other is existing adding onto it, which is much more
I think finishing something, becoming a little bit of that showcase.
It's a big block.
Right. I think
well, we can all do it. It's not, this is what that's over here. This is breakers. It sort of looks at it that way. But if we did,
I don't feel like it's
I think anything that's that size is, right, and they can just stack it separate buildings. So if you're
Coffee's good. Usually good.
Agreed. I mean, I think what he was saying is that when you take on one of the big ones,
The next priority is close proximity.
And I feel like
and
our facilities don't do that. For so much of our other
Ask me. So now one thing I want right from Oprah is I'm really impressed with being impressed programmatically and capacity standpoint, essentially the only difference is This would build an entirely new facility. It would be of size to accommodate growth. Well, if we want to do that, we want to and so there's no timeline. So you're just saying if everything in those proximity to big projects, that what you told us is of big projects, we can only do a big project Crest we first. Or vice versa.
No, but you know, like,
I know.
creative.
I know.
Put the admin on the bottom.
This could accomplish it. This could accomplish it. And you can write here. It's going to get hard. We're going to ask you. I know. It's hard. Somebody else asked me about this. These two will too.
Oh, at least. No, I mean, I think this is a 30-year plan. And even if we put that there, not saying that we would, all of them need to be, we're not going to
Yes,
so they're not small. You can be involved certain things and what can take advantage. Well, if we do this, we have some prioritization of this stuff. We can put that
But when you look at this as a time, so if we can't do it all at once, we do this here, right? Here's not
elementary schools take a lot in their routes. These things, 1 year, I would say, you really want to. This represents. Yeah, so you could do these smaller projects but there's no reason we can't still put it on and say.
We have a question. Okay,
Yes.
once again, break and roll. So if we do the cross under there, and we put this guy down here, then it doesn't actually need to
You
be.
can put it back there.
Like,
And you know that you're spending the facility here some way down the line. There's a bigger picture thing that you said it's probably even be past a lot of other stuff. And that's the thing is, you really don't know. You really don't know. Like, how here's your apple. How big is your first project? No one knows. That's what I was saying. That's the first buy. That's why it's staggered. Go all the way to there, right? And what you're telling us is that is the case, knowing what you know, priorities are. You know, these 3 projects.
I think the
Just moving on, trying to do it, just starting to move it.
I think there's also a sense of like, that population is probably smaller and not. But it'll still be the bigger one.
I'm gonna do a time check-in. You should be starting to narrow in on what your sequence is. And as you do that, be taking a few little notes on a pad of paper or something so you can quickly fill in the lines. All right?
I'm just not sure about this.
Yeah, I know. So, well, I think
I think if you, so that's the other thing you can do is if you do put the master planning together, you identify something down the road,
That was
but I think if you call these a chunk, you're basically doing it because, we're making it interchangeable. And maybe that becomes unnecessary. But I think we can look, like, even though we keep some like that,
right, but the worst company finds that. Where they feel like everything is. So I feel like that
do we want to do it?
Oh, no.
It's terrible. If anybody else wants to.
Right.
It has to be better for us. Yeah.
I sort of said it, but I said so, are we starting with stuff so far, and then sort of
okay, you have about 5 minutes to locate your pieces, and then about 5 minutes after that to tell us why. And really, the key thing is focus on the first 3 or 4 blocks, which is why.
If you were recognized for space or the other school level.
so if are we starting here saying how far
Right. Although there were some discussions about seeing words involved, like, you know, that's what you must do. Things work all different
Well, that's just based on when they probably, you know, it's 20%, they can bring it to 20%, they take in. Okay, so,
But like if you're building,
Yeah. Do you remember Pete?
I don't.
This will be
I've seen it,
I saw that too. I said, Pete, I know I just turned 81. I said, yeah, they aren't 81 yet. Is she? Is she? Tell me about it. But you know, everybody else appeared to be as consistent and work on time and stay on time.
what you just said. I just don't know how I can do it.
And then start writing your whys after that for about 5 minutes.
okay, so we have 5 minutes to raise. We'll just do it then. So I think that's sort of a generalization for starting there. And
Who? Who was she? Really?
yeah. We start.
Feel this. That's right. You shouldn't even feel like it. You didn't feel like and I was only just going to get my initials on my phone. And then I started playing with designs and I took it and talked to him. It's like, I just want some knowledge of
It's sort of a need to start somewhere.
No. When you come down Bellevue Way, right?
Okay, now be starting to write, start your right now.
Take a right.
Focus on the first 3 or 4. Those are the critical ones
There's
first.
a
there for everybody's on the
Only 4 minutes, we'll start to end them up.
It's understood. One more.
You got done this place. I'm so glad I did. I was so the people were so good. She had like
Road.
And they call the next day and it's they put that it's like a plastic patch. So they can't read English letters. It's just like one big letter. It says leaking cow. She's laughing. She says, no, it's fine. As long as it doesn't use alphabet. So it's a stain on my skin. She's like, no, you'll be fine. So then on Sunday, yesterday, he started doing job and so I peeled the stuff off. Just get some of this awkward stuff out of it, you'll be fine. Alright, you'll be fine.
Don't peel it.
Okay, about 3 minutes, and we're gonna start putting them up on the wall.
Who was it so fun?
No, I think we're just going to do it's upstairs, raised, and he said, and it's not like it's a massive job site. I'm sure they haven't yet.
We'll remember to say
Share.
we cite relay outside. Maximize site.
You want to take down, we're gonna hang on vertically.
Maximize the site. Large growth. Lake Ridge.
Kind of disappointed. He was relaxing. And he pushed really hard to stretch it.
I don't see you. They didn't say what.
We're all gonna go.
All right, as soon as you start, I'll just take it.
And we'll be over there. In which case then after you.
You're assuming that it's recording. You're just assuming that it's recording.
Yeah, I'm just assuming. I mean, I'll be terribly disappointed.
Oh my God.
One of those schools in which you have everybody going to the same and everybody's trying to get out. There's only one in and one out.
Okay, table number 1, are you at a point where we can hang it up? Fine work.
Somebody want to?
That's perfect. So I'm gonna go get this up. This is, I have tape dots already.
We can put more dots on it.
Well, I think there might be some moving around.
So bad. We died in first.
No, but if you say no, then I wouldn't want you to do
And no break.
No, we're all
You're talking to me, you can't let people eat by themselves.
But you know, you do have those exercises.
Okay, table number 1, would your representative like to come up? Are you guys about ready to go vertical? You gotta take down. So, would you, yes, here we go. All right, so we're going to get that 3 minutes. Just give a high level overview.
Okay, so one of the things we thought about, initially we had all the elementary schools beginning, but we wanted to make sure we were impacting all the different ages in the community. So we kind of sort of scattered these out. Highland Park, we felt like had the biggest need because of the roof and because of the need for sort of pedagogical demands with like breakout spaces, but this elementary school had the least opportunities for that.
And traffic.
And traffic.
The community benefit.
Right, and it would benefit the entire community because that traffic jam display is a nightmare for all students. And then we went to the high school and we made these changes. We thought they'd have a wide impact on a large group of people. We know that like college stress is a huge issue for high school students, so CCR was a priority, need for science labs, stress monetization, and the adult transition program. So we like this as a different age group than one, but a group equity for underserved and growth community at cost. Then IMS because it affects all the students in the district. And because the roofs, it's gonna be really expensive to do like a short-term repair on, so it made more sense just to rebuild. Then West Mercer and Lake Ridge for the same reason for the Island Parks, like we need better instructional spaces, more flexibility, a separate gym and multi-purpose room so that we could actually have more time in the daily schedule of the school. And then these we thought were really high priorities, so we thought they might be the most likely to get booster or private funding to enhance them. So we put that further out.
Tell them what they are.
Whether the district should even be doing it. What's that?
Tell them what they are.
Oh,
I can't read. from
Sorry,
there.
general education, shared support areas, PE athletics, and performing arts. So we think that those are really important, but we thought they might be the most likely to get funded in other ways. The pool impacts the entire community, but it's, anyway, we thought we should serve.
We say about that
Like,
pool all
if you
day.
combine something else, so we would vote for a levy that was just for admin building. Not that we don't love that.
Okay. I see table number 2 still working. We could jump ahead. 3's going. You guys really got used to it out there, right? So I'm finding you. Okay. So let me take your thing out. That's what you get for being rock stars at $1 million. This goes up here. 4. Great. All right.
Okay, so we started off with IMS. Again, we recognize that it's really, it's hitting the largest segment of students. And also that overall facility conditions of buildings 1, 2, and 3 are pretty bad. So we thought that as an opportunity to really make a good impact. We knew we were going to be different here with the pool coming in second. But our thoughts behind this are, it does service the whole community. It's the only pool on the island that does. And from what we've heard, it's a financial drain to the district as it is right now, both financially and probably as a resource perspective, just maintaining that facility. So we could get a new pool, again, get some community engagement, excitement around that. And it also does serve, again, what was it, the high school boys, just one state or something like that. So this.
Woo, yes, they do.
Number 3, we really went out on you here, and I know we're going to get a bunch of backlash, but we're not willing to give up the concept of combining trust, admin building, and adult places. So I know exactly. So we cheated here, but we're going to stick with that one. That's why we wanted that white block. Again, co-locating, better utilization of of real estate or land, going vertical versus horizontal. Again, better utilization of this mega block here. Then we started getting into looking at the Island Park. Again, as we start looking at the different elementary schools here, Island Park, of course, traffic, bad condition, student safety, and the way that campus is laid out. West Mercer, again, facility condition, not adaptive, or into the current configuration. When we start looking about flexible adaptability of space, both of these have that challenge. Then we kind of went into the high school side here. We really started looking and listening to the students that have been present as well. Talking about that shared support areas and how at that age, it's a tough age to be in. We've all been there.
And having a safe and comfortable place to go, we felt that was really important. The occupational, again, that's moved up the list in priority, so that occupational learning, so CCR and science. Lake Ridge, sadly way down here in number 7, but it is in fairly good condition. It's amazing. It's the oldest building in the school district at 66 years old, but it's still going strong because it's been maintained incredibly well. And then really just ending down here at the last one, still all very important, but when we stacked ranked them against some of the other things, kind of felt they weren't quite as core to student learning. So that's
What
ended
are
up,
those
right?
again? We can't see.
Was that?
What are your last?
Oh, I'm sorry. Gen Ed, PE, athletics, and performing arts.
Thank you.
You guys ready for number 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that there are some of the other sentiments almost verbatim, but we sort of thought that putting it out of the park, being central and visible, sort of core to the whole island, traffic impacts, and then the idea that possibly doing that could alleviate some of the athletic needs and some of the others. We got a new gym on the island. With the loss of that old Boys and Girls Club, there's some needs for after school programming. We were sort of all in mind with having the idea of IMS, which serves the largest part of the community, or everybody in the community. Finish what we start, and sort of creating that community showcase. Feel pretty good about how the high school sort of shows, and if we could have that other one where all the elementary schools could feel like you got somewhere to go that they're excited about going, which is one of the things we've been talking about, and then all the family benefit. And then, sort of the same thing everybody's been saying. I think it's interesting, the order seems to be consistent. We thought that the oldest building was the West Mercer one. We have, the fact that we would have a program in place for equity for elementary across the island. And then the population growth from the new downtown and the additional condos and stuff like that one is projected to grow the most, we think. We tried really hard to put these in the same spot, and so basically just stacked them and said they're the same thing in our minds. It's a good site. There's a couple different options. We think that we could get 2 birds with 1 stone with the building plan of some sort that way. And then the fact that those programs, admin is always going to be important with the crest growth and stuff like that. It's going to like Lake Ridge, everybody said it. And then we sort of grouped, I'm not sure that we were quite as specific on which ones were 7 and which ones were 8, but sort of that idea of taking off different chunks and saying, continuing to develop with whatever's most current, making sure that we get engagement from the students and everybody. And then the fact that we might get some cross support from some of the other programs that we got if we got a full new middle school. They're disparate in areas, but if we could alleviate some of the stress on the athletic fields, for example. And then just getting those general updates that we need to do on a every couple year basis. And the pool, we sort of, we were, everybody's positive on it, but the fact that it was something that we could get the private support, the boosters or something like that, we might be able to get that done separately. So it's low priority, but hopefully we can move it up.
Great, thank you. Table 3, all right, throw it in. Go on.
I'm gonna pull help from my cable too, because I miss
Teamwork.
So we kind of looked at, 1, 2, and 3, just to kind of start out with, because when this last page was just done, they were able to touch an elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. So we're trying to group it that way as well, hoping that as we do this, we can touch the most amount of students possible. So we started out with the high school, looking at the science, the CCNR, and the shared support areas, performing arts. We kind of looked at general education, although we put it down here, was kind of part of updating the science of the CCNR at the same time. Because a lot of it was technology and space use, etc. So we didn't really see it as two, but because it was two, we did put general education down here, but we kind of thought it was part of this first one as well, in the same combination. Our real hope, like I said, is that these three were done at the same time. The high school kind of affects the most students. It's also what a lot of people look at when they're looking at a district based on, where they want to put their kids, etc. It usually comes down to what the high school is. So we thought that was important. IMS we thought was super important and it impacts the majority of the students and households on the island. It was cheaply built when it was originally built, so now's the time to kind of make that turn into something better. I think people with phase 1 being done are expecting a phase 2, so I think that's not as hard for people to kind of buy into. We also looked at it as the way the middle school is kind of the first place that the kids have to unite before they go to high school together. You're taking kids from 3 different schools, probably like 4 different schools now, 4 different schools now, right? And they all kind of have their own personalities, and I came from whatever, well, this is their first time to be all together. And I think if you have them separated in the building, although I know it's not done by school, it still feels a little bit of that separation. So the idea of getting them all together for high school is really important. We also thought Island Park was hugely important. I thought almost everyone else, older building, all the things that we know needs to be done to it, and other people have mentioned. But it affects most people. We have safety concerns on Island Park. We've had several incidents with safety issues at Island Park. Where it currently sits is just not the best, use of the land. Scored poorly on age and adequacy of the facilities. And it also impacts the community. I am in real estate, so I'm going to plug. But it does impact the community in real estate as well, like where people want to live on the island, because people get worried about that, that bottleneck right there, and they don't want to live on the south end or the north end or east of it or whatever that case may be. And so I think that in general would be a good thing for the island as well as all of our home prices and land. But then we go into Westminster and Lakeridge. We kind of felt like we had a little discussion on this, but we think we need to impact all the elementary, and we don't want people to be like, well, I just want to live here or be here because of the new school, and it's important to kind of try and address as much as we can across the 3 together. Am I getting this right? And then we do not think this is less important than anything else for many reasons. One is the PE and the athletics, etc. We know that lots of people in the community use those spaces, and we think it's super important. If there were a way to move this up into part of this, we would. But we do think that needs to be done. We also, for the pool, although we did put it here as last, thought, if you're updating the fields and updating the PE facilities and all that kind of stuff, if there's a way to connect the pool to the school better, or make some sort of combination of that would be important. But we were told it had to be a big item. So we made a little item that said, consider pool connecting and planning athletic field. So that way maybe you can share locker rooms or make it one big locker room or that type of thing. And you're not building additional facilities and that kind of thing. Press we think is very important. We think, if you can do the new land or new something that we could then bring in the admin building. Once again, we have nothing against our admin. We love our admin, but in the end, the students come first, and then how can we incorporate the admin to give them a better? We want the teachers to be happy and the admin to be happy and hire the best people possible. So that's why we put that there. Remember something?
Number 5. I'm going to move 3 down. Spot here.
So a lot of what has already been said. We just middle school is in dire need of being done, and any repairs right now that would have to be done are going to be really expensive. So might as well take care of that. Island Park for the same reasons: traffic, space, facility, and then even though our idea is kind of to do several things at a time, so this really is just a priority list, and also think it's important for all the elementary schools. I mean, they all need it. They're all the same age and should have the same access to education and educational opportunities. We followed the rules because we did it in other. And then we did the other ones there. But so what our idea is what you guys did. I don't remember what number you were. But basically create a new building for Crest, CCNR, and admin, and put that on what's the JV field right now at the high school. So put that there. We know how important it is for Crest to have a separate entrance, but if it's a 3-story building, Crest can be on the bottom floor, have a completely separate entrance, have their own community, which we know benefits the kids that attend there. And then CCNR can, and possibly even the black box. I mean, whatever it is, the specialty rooms that need to go there could be constructed for that. And then admin, could be on the top floor. I'm not the architect, but just thinking on the top floor, and knowing how desperate some conference room spaces for professional development and other community groups in terms of renting space, that doesn't really exist right now. So having that all right there, the benefit of doing that is that then where Crest and the admin building can be taken down and kind of move the bus area so that it's not like completely blocking everything, but still be over there somewhere. Put in another athletic field or parking. I mean, whatever the parties that we think is the most useful for that space. But that's a lot of land right there, and that could be really beneficial. We know how much parking is needed at the high school. And then in doing this, creating a new field, the field that is right behind the pool and between the pool and the tennis courts, turf that as the new JV field and put in a field house. So a very simple structure, nothing fancy like UW, even though that would be awesome, right? Basically walls and a roof, like metal walls and a roof, so that we have a year-round for softball, baseball, lacrosse, the marching band can practice there. We could if we did the whole field, we could do graduations there. That would be a big enough facility, save thousands of dollars for renting those facilities and not having to travel off island. Anyways, just throwing that out there. Hey, if we got a $30 million donation, it'd be cool to do a really nice facility, but that's not what the intention is. The intention is something really basic and useful for the entire community. As we lose the old Boys and Girls Club, and it's also right there, and it's right there in terms of it ties the tennis courts, it ties the pool in. You can use co-facilities in terms of restrooms and locker rooms for all those buildings. It just frankly makes sense to kind of build up and restructure this mega block. Lake Ridge went after that just because we thought mostly for Crest. Crest is desperate to do something, and these even might, doing things at the same time, like you said, that impacts more students. So if we're not allowed to do that, then we put Crest and ATP here. And we know that we broke the rules there, but since ATP is in the Crest building, if you're going to do Crest, you kind of have to do ATP at the same time, right? So, what? I don't like following.
We'll get into that.
Doesn't that make sense? And then the high school improvement, we had CCR, performing arts, shared support, and general ed, and then PE, athletics, and science. And certainly with the idea that these could be, as smaller projects go, could be put in with others. And then we stuck these down at the end just because we were told we had to, even though they would be part of the other thing. I would love to see better community pool like what they have Mill Creek, like, kids area and things like that, which I think would help with revenue, but I just think we think the educational things need to come first, so unless someone, again, wants to give a lot of money for that.
All right, thank you. So we're gonna take, first of all, great job, guys. You did an amazing amount of work. We're gonna take a 5-minute break, okay? You'll come back, have an opportunity to ask any questions you might have of each other or whatever as a group. And then we're gonna move into the second exercise, which will make this look easy.
What'd you say?
And you would see him pop up and start to move, and without even knowing where the food was, there was an email that went out that you missed. And it was usually involved chocolate. And I was like, oh, full force. I used to joke with him that he had like some kind of a red alert or something, where like his email would prioritize the chocolate. And he would send chocolate.
Yeah, man, too.
You would self-identify
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Maybe didn't already
Did you? We have to talk about it. You didn't tell me that. So we do. No, we do. I know they're in. They just, actually, Abigail just tested me.
We're moving desks and
And, no, we'll
cleaning out.
do that all the time.
They're cleaning out. It's strange, but it's like, oh my gosh, the drawing set from like
Do you like that?
15 years ago. How has it been there that long?
You've moved
I didn't actually
every year or
Let's
two.
see. I mean,
Yeah, so today I inherited a bunch of attendee pieces that I hadn't seen in 5 years. And we built
I should
observed it. And it was, do you need any help?
I had originally, I had.
But he was like, do you need these? And I said, oh, my wife taught us to lunch actually. She said,
Oh, you did that one or the turkey? Okay. It was just like drainage or something, yeah. So I'm like, whatever the also say, here's what I want to see happen, and I'll do what I can to split it. Okay. There's one on the wall too.
pictures of things that are in areas that people use like complaints.
It's so
Yes.
Oh. Right.
We do a lot of
Yeah.
we do a lot of dragon
And like,
all
okay.
these down there.
There's more.
Like, we gotta race to one school, like, problems with the mom. But it's like racing.
They're not retiring yet.
You saw it.
That's how I felt. I've waited. So I got back today. No, I retired.
Okay. So we're gonna go into round 2 now. So why don't we do about unless there are lots of questions, about 10 minutes or so of just a larger group discussion about what you've seen. And what we're kind of after here is if any of you have maybe cross-table questions about some of the discussions around a particular prioritization or anything like that, or I guess if you have questions of us as well, just an opportunity to sort of talk about those and hear each other. So, did anybody see anything that surprised them at all? I mean, there's some big differences here. So,
For me, it looked like all but one thing had the high school stuff pushed out to the end. And that's interesting that the high school stuff was pushed to the end. Was there any rationale for that? Or?
They were little. I think someone said maybe boosters could help cover the cost of that, because maybe those programs would find some funding elsewhere. If they're kind of fun and seem like the type of private entity would support.
Our feeling was that they could go in with some, at the same time as some big projects.
I think we asked a lot of our boosters. And not everyone who's a booster on the island has the money to be a booster. And I think that we just because we're surrounded, not putting you down, I'm just saying.
I didn't bring it up.
You have free
boosters and do quite a bit, but I think, you know, are constantly relying on, well, this is the point that the whole community benefiting. So I think that's, and my other question is, one thing that I just thought of is, you know, some of these things at the high school that we are gonna fix and make better, even like the PE and the, which we put middle-ish to end, PE pool and, drama facilities also are rented out, so there are ways to make revenue for the high school. And so I don't know where that falls into, maybe moving them up or down the ladder to be able to make money back.
I want to add before we introduce some of the other questions, one thing to this conversation too. I think it's important to be thinking about, because we're going to have you do this again. It's important to be thinking about the idea that a number of those programmatic elements, maybe not all of them, but a large number of them, will probably require added space, not insignificant space, to the high school. Because the high school's pretty full right now. And so it's not as though you can continue to stuff more, especially the bigger things, into that same box. So just know that these are likely going to be, without getting into the weeds, what the scope of them is, because we don't know, they haven't been programmed exactly. They will be sizable projects. So they're real sizable projects, okay? You got a hand up.
Yeah, what got my attention, and actually my support, is the pool right up there on this number 4. Getting the pool right up there in the beginning and the community support combined with the, I believe that was the admin and press combo right there.
Yeah.
I have now thought that might be a great idea.
And I'm curious, the thinking behind that as a good idea.
We wrestled with that pool, and the pool knowing it is the only one, it's community support. You'll get a good community face that wants that. And yet we wrestled with, well, you still should probably put the majority of kids first and all your elementaries and your middle school, but kind of like the pool up there personally.
And obviously one of the challenges there, perception-wise, is that, the pool is a big community resource from what I'm hearing, but at the same time, in light of sort of the mission that was put up from the district, it is not strictly this is my own personal opinion on this, it's not a heavy lifter from the standpoint of supporting education.
But it is a heavy lifter with getting the community behind it to pay for it.
Okay.
Maybe.
I think you can backfire too in the other sense that are you putting computer science and art and performing art ahead of behind the pool?
Right.
So
That's
suddenly
why we
you've
didn't put it up there,
alienated
isn't
the parent community in a big
That's why ours is at the very back. I don't know, it's fine.
This is good.
I have a comment on the pool. If you've lived on Mercer Island as long as I have, you've seen the pool get kicked around from organization to organization. I can't think of a community of 5,000 or more that doesn't have a swimming pool and consider it a basic life skill. And so it's ended up in the school district. It is a basic life skill. It's a financial drag on the school district, and nobody's going to take it over given the condition that it's in. So maybe it's not strictly a school district issue. It's just been the organization of last resort. It is something that does need to be addressed.
For what it's worth, the district that my kids go to, they're redoing the pool right now. They're building a new pool building. And there was a big conversation around that, and the reasons that you're talking about are why that happened.
Bellevue got rid of all of theirs. Bellevue School's home pool is American. What? Most years. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know?
They're not
I was curious if people talk about schools generating revenue, but is that significant? It strikes me that it wouldn't be significant in terms of operations.
I can't say that I know enough about how much they get rented out. I can't really comment on what that would be. I don't know. My guess is it wouldn't be that significant, but
I think we should go back to the drawing board and have
city, the school district, part of the school. Or is it? Everybody belongs.
What else? Anything else that people were surprised by or have strong feelings about being in either the right position or the wrong position? Yeah.
This education wise thing for us is that even though IMS and MAHS affect all the students in the district, that like education wise, you have the biggest impact with the younger students. And so like I'm part of having access to those breakout spaces for, pod workers and priorities so that those younger students can really have their education transformed at a younger age.
Is there a comment on like why these would be just programs have been pushed back? And I think that's kind of like functionality every like day to day when thinking about the programs in comparison to other schools, because a lot of things you're talking about is that like physical problems that are like the facilities in say the elementary schools or the middle school, you're not really having like those like physical problems with the actual school buildings in the high school. It's about the programs, and it's about capacity within programs and like outdated technology, which on a scale can seem, less important when compared to like, oh, the roof is falling down. There's water on the floor. As well, I think that it's very much like they are all additions. You kind of think of them as kind of like they're on a very different scale than a replacement. You think about like what's more important, because I think that going to high school every day to day, it's fine. It's a very good school, and we achieve all these things. We're essentially just trying to up the capacity to make them, or which is like very important. And I like think that it's very important to have as well. It kind of seems it's less dramatic than the other changes, probably because I think there's a bunch of small pieces. Rather than one big chunk. So
Last question, one or two yet.
I just had a general question, because our group kind of felt like when we were in elementary school, it was important to pick all three of them. Yes. We need equity and making sure that all kids get the same opportunities. And I'm not putting anyone down, but I noticed all the rest seem to separate them out a little bit. So I'm just more curious what the thinking was about how it would be perceived from the total public if, one school's getting done and they want to not get done for 5 years.
It's a great question. Or longer.
Or longer. So I'm just curious.
Well, I think, from my perspective on that, even if we do staff all the elementary schools, you're looking at, potentially 10 plus years between the time that the first and the third ones, if they are 1, 2, 3,
Sure.
you can have the equity to start with right there. I think if you look at it from a program perspective as well as the additions that thing will influence that, there's going to be that gap. There's going to be a period of time where hopefully everybody understands this is a journey and that it's going to take 10, 15, 20 years to get to.
Yeah.
But that's just my
Once again, I'm not judging them.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier is sort of that idea of how big a bite are we talking about. So I like the way the group number one sort of said in this last round we did some high school, we did some elementary school, we did some middle school in one big chunk. So it's not so much that it's all going to, in my opinion, having said that, what is our appetite is another good question.
Yeah.
So if we could go and take a fairly large chunk, it may be that it's more than one or two at a time in a couple different chunks. It's going to take a long time to get to all of it for sure. But I'm guessing that this is going to have something where we can start throwing some of these into it to buy some time.
Possibly. Okay, last question.
Our group felt this was hugely the crest, and that it was larger than Lake Ridge, just because those kids, there's so many kids on waiting lists to get in there. And so it was really.
So I'm gonna keep us moving forward because I do want to get us through this second exercise, but we will have time at the end for another large group discussion. So you can tie in whatever you've got in your head about this work and hopefully the next cycle through it as well. Okay. All right. So and you've already kind of made a great segue into this. You've already been talking about, sort of how long things might take and bites at the apple and all of that kind of thing. My experience has been when most districts have been this effort, they're looking at, when we start talking about phasing things, trying to deal with everything they've got problematic in the district. It's 3 or 4 of these phases before they kind of hit everything. And then just about the time they've hit everything, it's not too far to where they have to go back and start again in some way. So that's just another ongoing thing. Why am I saying this? Because if you look at this line of projects and you think about it in terms of phasing, you realize that the things that are at the tail end of these, or maybe even up into the middle of that zone, are waiting for a while, probably quite a while, all right? Which means that some of those things that are at the tail end, and I don't know how far forward you go towards the front, may want some sort of interim projects as well. Because if something is waiting 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 years, the question is, what, if anything, do you do in the interim? Okay? And that's what this little effort is about. So the question is, for these things in that last zone, or maybe in the third, or for some of you, maybe even in the second phase, depending on what you got in there. Since they're waiting, you just let them wait. And I want to be clear what I mean by this. The things that need to keep them running. If a roof is really leaking and it needs to be fixed, right? And it's going to be 20 years before you get to do one of the big projects on it, that stuff's going to happen. It's going to have to happen. There's no question about it. And there are certain projects in that category that are a larger sort of expenditure, like the middle school. People have talked about this already. Don't want to replace the roof, and plus it fits more students at once. We put the middle school up front. What we're focusing on here is we want you to just sort of put yourself in the headspace that the stuff that needs to be fixed, it's going to need to be fixed. So don't really worry about that. What we're more interested in finding out are the things that programmatically will improve the conditions at a given grade level or school in the interim. Okay, so for example, you may remember that at the top of all the lists at the elementary schools was the issue of the shared cafeteria gym and how that was impacting that program at each of the schools, and how the whole setup was very difficult and all kinds of things. And all of the principals had said, man, if we had 2 spaces to do that, it would really make a big difference. That's one example. So what you're going to see on this list at the grade school level are 3 programmatic kind of clumps of projects. The first one, and this goes for all the schools, this clump of 3 is what we're calling add gym or cafeteria. One of the others, we don't really know what it is. But it's basically addressing that big programmatic issue that they identified. The second one is shared learning spaces at each of the schools. And the third one is various miscellaneous projects, which you can see some of which here might be under that category. So we made a little list of things that were coming from what principals told us and that sort of thing. Okay. We are going to ask you, and I should just touch on this while I'm talking about it. Middle school projects, there are 3 there. I won't go through all of them. You can look at this list simply and see what in each one of these. So there are 3 at the middle school as well. Really at the core question here, I'll just give you one example which will hopefully stir your conversation and thinking about this, is if you said, I'm going to pick one of them, Lake Ridge for group number 2 is towards the last third of projects. Would you ever, and that may be 15, 20, 25, or 30 years from now that you got to that project, would you add a gym or cafeteria in the interim to that? while it's waiting, okay? And at the end of however long it waits, I'm gonna put even a little more pressure on this question. Is sure, in the ideal world, you would add a gymnasium that when you replace that building, you could use that gymnasium, right? But I'm going to say that the likelihood of doing that, it's possible, and it could happen, dependent upon the site, but the likelihood of being able to do that and reuse it and have a good site configuration at the end, like if you were a liquid site, may be somewhat in question. So you need to be willing, dare I say, to throw that gym away in 25 or 30 years. I'm gonna really put some pressure on you guys. Okay? Yeah. So what you're gonna do is you are going to, at each grade level, we're going, and at each site actually, you're going to pick per site one and only one of these programmatic elements. So for example, you may decide, you know what, your group talks about it and you say, we don't believe any interim projects should be made because of this, that, and the other. And what you have done stays just the way it is. Other groups may say, oh, at the elementary level, we put Island Park first, so we don't need to do anything at Island Park, obviously, as an interim project because it's right up front. But for Lake Ridge and West Mercer, let's talk about that. And it's for those two schools, you will pick one for each of the sites, only one project. So you'll put a gym, or if you don't do a gym, you will do shared learning, or if you don't do that, you'll do miscellaneous projects. And the reason we're limiting you to one is we want to know what you think the priority is of those projects. And two, if you start doing a bunch of projects at that site, you're essentially moving towards full modernization, which is different than you said you wanted to do in the long haul, which is replacement. Okay, so you don't want to start by fixing everything and then replacing it in 25 or 30 years. Okay, same thing for the middle school. You're going to pick one of these programmatic things if you think so. So here we go. We have two questions here. So we do the same thing. The first thing we're going to ask you to do is we want you to place your round one pieces in the same position that you did, and you're going to do it on the round two board. Okay. So you can look at there and you can very quickly see where you place them, and you just place them right across. So that's your starting baseline. All right. And if you want, we're going to put a little caveat on this. After hearing what other groups have said, if your group decides, oh, table 3, I like their idea about this project, maybe we should shift our stuff around a little bit as a baseline. You can do that. You can do a quick reprioritization. So you don't have much time to do that.
Don't take them down.
Okay? After you have placed your baseline, then we'd like you to discuss and answer these two target questions that are on your page. Okay? And determine which, if any, of those interim projects should be included in your prioritization. So only, as I stated before, only one interim project gaming piece may be selected per school. And you don't have to select them if they're way up front. You might say that isn't an interim project. Okay? Now, you're going to add that chosen interim gaming project piece to the timeline in the order of your group's prioritization and in combination with the pieces of round one. But the same rules apply. You cannot stack anything on a big piece. You cannot stack the small ones higher than 4. And so you need to be aware that adding interim projects may cause you to push out some of your other prioritization pieces.
Very common.
If you believe interim projects should be done. And what we want you to do So you're gonna here are your pieces you started, and if you add an interim project to that stack, okay, and in this case there were only 2, right? So where you add an interim piece or you make some other change, we'd like you to make a note about why you added that interim piece or why you made the change. Don't worry about filling everything out. We just want to know why you made things different, what you added in and why. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So you can go ahead and start that rolling.
There was a question. I think you'd be really interested.
I'll go back there.
Right. We still have, yeah, we still have. I get some of this in there.
Well, like that.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, gonna make a hard one. Yeah. You know, I feel better about making this. You're right.
Remember, this is just prioritization.
Right. There's so much more sustainability. You know what I mean? Like they don't all have their own car. Okay.
It's been tough.
Right, I know. Yeah. You like the return. So which one of these? So which one is so? And the crest one.
Yes.
But then this is a big one. So now this can't be stacked. So oh wait, so CCR goes too. So science. So I feel like the biggest legitimate to the Westminster is because there's a shared gym period across the entire set of 2 years. You know, because it's so tight trying to get the lunchroom turned over and the expresses in there that like so many other instructions will be improved by having separate gyms and cafeterias. Are we putting Island Park here? I mean, I think we should. No, but I feel like for Westminster, we actually have shared living spaces and they're not a pod configuration like Westminster. So they've shared living spaces in the last year, but I do think the gym and the cafeteria would affect. The Lake Ridge, I don't know.
She's had the same issues as Westminster.
The gym, right. I just didn't know what their shared living spaces are. I think that like a high
So when were you, what was the question?
Well, I think you could make the bus loop actually smaller and do like a long narrow level. When the gym is just when you put it out in.
Remember, one camera and folks. Yeah, absolutely.
So you could add a play structure there, it's a concrete space.
I guess I don't wanna worry about this.
Yeah.
Speaking of projects out, so if it's not sustainable, if you update it to school.
Right, then we do this.
Could do that. But
I mean, I feel like Westminster is functional right now, except for I feel like the gym issue. I mean, I've kind of done other ones like that, but I mean, I feel like we could do.
Westminster has.
Right. Right. I mean, there's no privacy, and I know they use them.
I mean, the biggest concern with adding something to school is you know, there was a big problem with the 1990s.
Yeah. They're more invasive than just adding
They're all torture.
another section. That's happening it on. Phase 1, phase 2. We want to do phase 2, right?
The architectural plan, they were
What of these other small
We got Joe.
they can do science here. This will all be taken here. Share some more areas.
Do we think this one is science?
Okay. Okay, let's do that. Because then we can do this here. This is gonna impact so many areas. Right, so this actually hits everybody but I this.
For 3 years.
Do this and move this over.
This would be the first to,
All of Westminster, so Westminster would be getting something here, and Lake would be getting something here.
I think it was,
But the reason why the general ed well, I think they were talking about the decompression spaces. Oh, okay, this is okay.
counseling.
Well, right, that's because there's no privacy right there.
But I would say.
Right, and my hope is that they don't necessarily if they're gonna do anything with the high school.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so
It's like, so the Yeah, I guess we don't need to get but here.
High school, middle school,
Yeah.
high school, elementary, but middle school.
Yeah. And for the principal, the gym is there, all the ones, that was their priority. Maybe something else will. But I just.
So,
Well, I do think that a pool booster is not a bad idea.
Any place that's a pool can stick like
Just today.
So the thing is we move.
and things.
So the like combination
Fred, CCR. Yeah,
I'm just writing 18. This one, this people like impacts like a lot of them, right?
I know that,
Right. Does this make my list spicy?
I worry about
Yeah, it's personal safety and liability for the future.
I'm not saying that.
Think about this is 10 years, this is 20 years.
So we're back.
School, that's a whole area. There's only probably one.
They went to all three at the same time.
All three, we've done two schools, we've done four.
All of these schools they were built by the state, right? When these were built, they were. So I think a lot of like seniors don't realize. Right, because they just they
Helping them greater, or we're gonna fund it in.
No, I think it was a big chunk of it was cost. It would be too expensive. And then you had to be very close on the bed.
So we was bringing like this. It's very
Very specific. So we're gonna do the high school standards from phase one of the middle school.
So then
My son says that we cancel school for 2 years.
I'm like, it'll be totally fine. It's very clear to technology. My kids were on a park, they were really right outside the window of the park.
Notice more about the code on tonight. Thank you very much.
Initially, I said, okay, today
nothing quite.
Priorities like the building connections and then, okay, so we care about what the press has.
yeah, so I'm encouraging them to be hard on it.
Makes what them do if they got more than gas.
Just like the combination plan.
like the biggest wins for the school rebuilding is time savings, right? Okay, about the next 4 minutes or so, use the position, pieces position, and take down. And then after that, you'll have about 5 minutes to put those areas of change or reality.
Here though, it's like the stuff, right? Eventually it's a lifespan. Like, I mean, they were talking about how it's the highest, eventually we will get them. That's what I like a life sit up. Like doing a Catholic society, like a tent, like like cafeteria smell, just the open air.
They middle school was kind of $40 million project. Stagger it. But this is a cheap project.
Right.
And then there's no incentive. Do a staggering orientation.
That's very
They always don't like
Yeah, so doing this, one for
it's a print.
$40 million.
Oh, yeah.
They do, yeah. Maybe about 50 every 25 years.
Small course.
You spend your time.
You still like bills, doesn't mean
I can't go there.
Mark and I spent 2 months. And it
But there's some design point
I wonder if we can sell this though too, is that if we use a similar design or same design, kind of like we take same units would be.
And everything like craftsman.
right.
retirement list.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, you should have your pieces taped on or you're taping them on, and then start making a few notes of why you have added them. And if you've made other changes, make notes of why you made those changes.
Yeah.
Like 50%, in 12 years.
You make so much money.
Price is cool down.
Right. But it's basically your retirement.
So make your notes of the shifts that we've made or pieces you've added. About 3 minutes left.
And I mean, we seem like these some self-contained. So you'd be looking for a footprint that's not necessarily in the core of the school. So we'd be able to work on a little bit more. They're it's a self-contained area. Most
Because they want to change, right?
So having design allows more specialization for the teachers. But I do have work class there, we can't tell which classroom is. Pleased about what they did. Yeah, so they're like, I was very anonymous. It was really insane.
we prioritize. I think we're kind of
this is how Yeah, I think it's doing So should we be wrapping these? It's funny how like people love me. Change.
No problem. All right, so why don't we have table one come up and just do a quick overview of the changes. Anyone you'd like to come up and give a 2-minute spiel? Table one. Okay. There we go.
We did, we added a gym and cafeteria to Westminster Language. We thought that had the biggest impact on the most students. So we were hoping it could be done either cheaply or in some way that would be able to be incorporated into their design. With a little bit of fear that if we change this, then this would be a harder sell to the community. And then the MIHS General Ed and the Science. So we thought this would have a large impact across the district. We left IMS here. And then we really liked the combination plan. I was like impressed after building, so we put that here.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Traction.
And then we actually had this fancy plan about the elementary schools that we could create like a component pieces, so it would be the same design money spent on all of these, but then we put them into different blocks and so sell that to the community. And then performing arts and shared sport areas, and then that the PE athletics field pool combination we also liked. So
Yeah, great. All right, let's skip to 3 while
I think we're done. We're good.
oh, you're done? Okay, 3 can go up and then I'll take this, I'll get this back.
So for 3, we just thought we were so genius the first time we want to change it. So we kind of re-looked at it and we pretty much kept it similar. The big changes we made is we talked about the fact that if we looked at this in years of planning, Lakebridge has to wait a long time to have anything major done to it. So we added a gym to Lakebridge, gym cafeteria or some sort, because we figured that could be used for a lot of other things as well. Just having that extra space, whether it be extra space for classes or activities or whatever that would be. So we thought that would kind of keep the school, who's going to have to wait forever, to have something, once again, either something cheaply that would, last till they can get done, or something that later can be incorporated because that footprint is kind of the footprint. So we did that. The other change we really liked, once again, is adding the admin building crest and ATP all together and making that one big building. So we loved your idea of combining it all. So although it's 3 big blocks, we're pretending like it's just 3 small blocks. And we did move the science up here. We had some question on that. The only reason we moved the science is not because it's less important, but they did just do some upgrades to a lot of the science rooms. And so we thought, let's focus on the areas that have not been touched at all first.
And we know that not all the science rooms are done and not all, there's still robotics and we don't understand the importance of STEM. So at this point, we're like, we were, to be honest, we were a little bit not quite sure on that one. So it was more a necessity because we already broke rules. We were trying to go back to some of the rules. So
I made them stick with 4 stacking so they could.
So
Okay, great. I'm gonna put you up really quick. Table 2, would you like to sneak in here?
Just kind of shifted it down a little bit.
You guys are like not placing experts now.
Hey, was it this group that said they wanted to touch on this? We really liked the thought of this. So we moved a couple things for the high school here, the CCR, since that program is growing, and the shared support areas. It seemed like that would really alleviate some of that pressure in the school too. We added the gym or cafeteria to Lake Ridge and West Mercer. So we put some lines like, oh, wishful thinking, this would be the ask. Like if we could get the first 3 blocks, that would be an amazing thing to happen all at once. And every age group would get touched. We like that. But what if IMS doesn't get in that? I don't know. We didn't have anything for IMS over here. But this did get those big spaces for Lake Ridge and West Mercer, so they would take care of some of the problems with the cafeteria, with having the carts outside, with losing time for PE classes. And who knows, with the way that those spaces are designed, maybe some little smaller rooms could be tucked in there. Only time will tell. Everything else stayed the same. We just added the gym.
Except
And then,
we combined the crest that we added.
oh, we did.
So
We
one of
like
those
that.
is in 6.
Listen, everything. So
Now there's a hole.
I know, there's a hole.
Anything to do.
yeah, great. It was this.
Okay, there we go. I feel better.
We like the idea of combining the buildings too. Let's do one project instead of 3 mini ones. And then we put ATP because he said they're in the same building anyway, so it makes sense to put them together. So it's touch all age groups. Oh, be strategic about the placement of the gyms to not displace the kids.
All right. Well, first off, super excited that we're getting some traction. Admin building. We aren't going to give up on the pool though. We're going to converge all. Pull up there. Anyway, so we really recognizing that we had the elementary schools kind of pulled towards the lower, further down the priority list. We definitely wanted to bring something to them. We really struggled on what that was. Obviously we're seeing a lot of the gym. We heard from the teachers, the staff, the gym. But then we thought about, it's worked for 66 years. Can it work for another few? And so what we ended up going with is the shared learning, because that's really addressing the way we're teaching. And that has changed. And that is something new in the way that we're approaching so long as the teachers running 20 people, astounding their great knowledge. And then that's it. We're changing the way that we're teaching. So we want to kind of address that. The other piece of that is that's probably going to change again in the next 20 years. And so by the time we get here and redo these schools, this isn't disposable from the standpoint of wasting our effort, because it's probably going to change the way between now and then that we teach. Again, it's probably be virtual and people just be wearing glasses and staying at home. Who knows what it'll be? Maybe we won't even build a Lakers anymore. Probably homeschooling virtual. Who knows? Anyway, so we ended up going straight on that aspect just because we felt it was addressing a need of today and the need of tomorrow on the way that we teach. So, and then I also just kind of moved everything over. That's a pool.
Great.
Our insertion here was the Lake Ridge and West Mercer gyms. I think for many reasons we felt like getting those done up front so that there was something for these two as they got pushed further out the line made a lot of sense to us. This was the first exercise where we spent a lot of time thinking about how to bundle, or what the phasing of the bonding would be. And I spent a lot of time talking about that as opposed to how much more we would sort of start to change. We moved a few things around, but I think one of the things that we recognize is that the bond that built this building, also built phase 1 of IMS and did some work at the high school. So, we sort of saw this as maybe not an easy, phase 1 bond, but, would it be possible to do this and maybe even capture that in this next round, given the time of the last one? The rest of it seemed like maybe we could even try and get a little bit more. We talked about moving some of this stuff up here as well, but we understood that sort of with the combination of these various facilities, a lot of the stuff that is in the high school already is going to be moving. And so a fair amount of stuff is going to happen in the high school when this kind of stuff happens anyway. So it just seemed like there's going to be a lot of overlap there, and that we would, adopt that as necessary, but focus here and then get into the middle school or the elementary schools as we go.
Great. All right. Well, that's a lot of work in a short amount of time. So now we have 15, 20 minutes or so. If you have any questions of each other or thoughts, whether it be the first go around or the second go around, are you seeing things that have changed that you're liking in the direction? Are there things up here that you are strongly questioning or don't maybe make as much sense to you? And by the way, I should say, nobody should be offended by any questions or comments because we're really just sort of working through this for the first time. And it's a difficult exercise, so, don't be afraid to ask a few questions. Yes.
I think, well, I was just saying, one of the hardest things that I find for myself is, I need to not to worry about it, but is the bond. I mean, because my priority may change slightly had I known, the gym's gonna cost $2 million and that would be, 50% of the bond. Or, those things are totally unrealistic, but, you know what I mean? To me, that would make a big difference, but if the bond is $20 million and it's going to something, that may make a difference on what that 10% of it is. So, to me, it was important to touch as many students across the island as I could.
Right.
And benefit the kids, but once again, I think the bond is a big part that I feel like I'm missing.
Right. Yeah, and the one thing I'll tag on to that is, as you know, the whole concept of going out for a bond is never an absolutely certain thing. You try and make it as certain as you can, and try and make a group of projects such that it will get support, but you don't know. And so, as you're looking at this, what I would say generally the way to look at it, think about it, is for any one of these sort of layouts, does it make a difference to you in your thinking? And I'm going to just randomly use my hand metric here. If for a phase versus, like you guys were thinking at here, versus a phase, and then a subsequent phase, you know what I mean? Does any of that cause you to make a significant change in prioritization of projects? And if it did, then that is something that we'll probably want to explore. That tonight. That would be, a good question for you to be thinking about. Because again, what we're really after is, after I've seen, is what is this prioritization and why? Because we don't know how big those bites are.
Well, the question you asked in your sheet is, what is the minimum amount of time that we would consider acceptable, right, between an interim project and the building place? That was the one that we had really struggled with.
Yeah.
Right, because we've got our, we have Lakeridge gyms, and Lakeridge and West Mercer being free. Right. West Mercer and Lakeridge are only, a hop away. Right. And we said, well, 5 years is probably enough, but 10 years, probably is. But if those are so close in our order of priorities, we don't want to necessarily wait 10 years just because we want that amount of time to pass, right? Yeah. So we didn't get to full, I think, conclusion on that, right? But it was the one that caused us.
Yeah, I think this is a huge, really excellent point. can be just sort of kicking around too. And again, the unknown factors that are going to be playing into it are not only ultimately the size of each kind of, I'll call them packages, so to speak, but also the frequency of them, right? So you could have a package like this, and depending on frequency, this might be a long time in the future. Long time. And because we don't really know what that frequency is it's a little bit of guesswork. And frankly, the real key is it's this first stuff, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, that you're telling us are sort of the most certain ones in your mind in terms of prioritization. And really, at some point out here in the future, you will be coming back and saying, okay, is what we said before still valid or not, or something changed? Because that would be way out there. We don't know, right? And as I look at these, it's interesting because there's enough of a difference. I mean, yes, there are consistencies in some of these, right? But there's enough of a difference between them that I think we're going to talk more about those projects. Yeah.
Well, I mean, looking at all of them, all the IMS like near the front.
Yeah.
But I don't really see how our top 3 planning goals, which is flexibility, adaptability of spaces, safety, and occupational learning, IMS doesn't really hit any of those.
Safety.
Really?
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Is that the?
It's safety when you talk about IMS.
Okay. Kind of Island Park was like an issue because of the traffic.
Well, it's safety
But
too,
yeah.
but when you talk about IMS, remember you've got 2 separate buildings, and you have a schedule where every 50 minutes, 1,100 kids move, exit buildings.
Yeah, and there's sort of a gray area too with regard to like the flexibility, adaptability piece, because on the one hand, you could argue that the classic building of the 100 to 200 has spaces outside the classrooms that students can go to. What I would say, and it's certainly not an in-depth sampling, but when I walked around the school, it appeared as though those spaces at the new wing were being much more heavily used than the older building. And so while they're there, it's really a question that spectrum, could they be better? And if so, would that be significant?
I have a question about the long range planning. Give a sense of how frequently a process like this would take place. So after the first phase, would it be time for another process like this to realign priorities, or would it be a couple of phases?
There are a number of things that trigger the discussion around when it's time to update a long range plan. Really, it's best. Most districts will revisit the plan after each phase, if only from the standpoint of trying to determine whether or not the priorities, let's just say for talking purposes, this is a dozen years or 15 years at some point out here. Somebody mentioned that a lot of things can change over time. The condition of the buildings, the teaching mode somewhat, which is why flexibility is super important. And it's always good to go back and just say, hey, is what we thought back then in terms of the priority or sequence what we think now? And that's just good practice. So yeah, usually every phase early.
I think one thing that was a good reminder that you said was, for me, was that the things that need to get done are gonna get done. So I'm not really concerned that my kid's gonna be in a classroom with the roof leaking on them for a year, right? The roof needs to get done, it'll get done hopefully. And I thought that was a good reminder, because then we're talking about, like you said, the use of space, the use of what we can to take the schools to the next level.
Right.
And that, it was a good reminder to me.
And I think that the one tag on I would add to that too is, another factor is as things get done, they're sort of, they're also at the same time incrementally getting worse.
Right.
And so you sort of fix things in the short term, but as things start to age over the longer haul, the system as a whole starts to fail, which is why, let's say, at the middle school, it sounds like the entire roof probably needs to be replaced rather than patches. So,
right.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about, do we also want to do 2 elementary schools at the same time? So depending on how those funds come out, looks like Westminster and Lakeridge might potentially be done at the same time, or Island Park and Westminster could be done at the same time, depending on which map you're looking at. That might be a little problematic.
Kids stay home for a year.
Yeah. And then it is interesting, the lost bond we passed was in 2014. The next opportunity, there's another big set of levies in 2022 timeframe. So, if it's 2026, that's probably about every 12 years or something like that. You're looking at a cycle for bonds. So that kind of gives you an idea how this would work. And then the half-life of a bond is about 25 years. So that's another piece as to how much outstanding taxes are there at the time as well. So that might suggest breaking them down to 1 and 2 as opposed to 1, 2, and 3. So you go out for smaller bonds. So a bunch of math around that.
Right,
and that's right. So it's going to be complicated, but it seems like 12 to 14 years is where you could go out for bonds.
And I think that to tag on what you're saying too, that how that plays into the prioritization. Another way to look at these is if you said, all right, the chunk that ends up being what the first phase is only this much, or it's this much, whatever one it is. When you look at that, do you say, wow, in that much, I wish some other thing would have been in that much? Which is really the prioritization piece. Oh, had I known that we could only bite off, that much. And if you look at it and say, yeah, I think we got the right ones. That's a good thing. Yeah.
Having worked a lot on the bond at Vail, it was a lot of elementary school parents really doing the best work and what they want to see in the future because our kids are going to school for Columbia. So I think that's also very important when you look at it to make sure that there's something that young parents are going to get behind. High school parents don't tell you when it puts out the door and that's not something. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, the point that you were making about the interim projects, that is like a really difficult exercise. I noticed for some groups, well, this group right here, and this is really, this group right here, I thought there was one other. Putting the gyms up front to create sort of I'll call it a sort of equity position in a way, as much as possible without making a big body. Does that sort of move make the folks at these elementaries okay with the prioritization? And then, we don't know the size of these bites, but when it comes time to replace these, whenever that is, if you cannot make them part of this design, pretty questionable, I think, on some of these sites. Is everyone okay with them going away? So that's this, and to go to your point, how long is that time? Right. Yeah. Right. What else? I'm surprised, I'll just say a few things. There's my observation since there's a quiet moment in the group. I'm surprised at both the admin positions, how often they're towards the front. Here's one that's relatively close to the front. I guess that's kind of in the middle. Here's one that's pretty close to the front. Here's another one that's pretty close to the front. I say that because, in our experience, I don't know if Jennifer corroborated this or not, but that tends to be a project that's at the tail end of everything.
Well, I would argue that it has a lot to do with looking at the whole campus planning, because that gives us an opportunity to address a lot of the other issues.
At one
So,
fell swoop.
yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing.
Yeah.
It's a fun deal.
So would it be fair to say that if you're able, as many of you have, to bundle those
Yes.
projects together as a project up front, if for some reason they are not bundled, maybe not up.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But I got, at least for me, I don't know that it's still one of my top two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. It's, you know, it's definitely more.
I just want to be careful for what
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. The other thing that I would be surprised, I think it's just the troublemakers that do it. And the pool. So balance a little bit. You know, everyone else I think is. You should continue to try and
We'll convert.
When you look at communities similar to ours, like Bainbridge, et cetera, what kind of chunks do they break off that are successful?
I can answer. I can answer that one related to Bainbridge. So they were looking at a significant project per bite. The meaning a whole new facility, and they in their bond packaging they looked at a whole new facility and then kind of a smaller project added on to that.
Like a whole facility, meaning one school.
Like one school.
Okay.
An addition to
Okay.
a facility, and then improvements to the other facilities, so that there was the kind of spread.
Right.
They were, when they started in 2005, they set out the meter one bond for per 5 years. With the economic downturn, they missed a cycle, and so they have they have 2 projects left, and this most recent master plan update that we did a couple of years ago, they've actually combined those 2 projects into one. So they're going to co-locate rather than wait 10 years to replace. But there's no, they just passed a bond to help carry some of the costs, but there's no date yet for when that one might come.
But about a school every 5 years.
That was what they decided.
But that passed.
That was what they decided. Yeah. And they passed from 2005, all of them, they have passed.
Great.
As a community.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think there's really no singular answer to that, because you know, we have seen several districts that have tried and have, well, at least one of them I think right off the bat, successfully passed bonds on a 5 to 6 year cycle. They're going to be going out again this upcoming year, and we'll see if that continues. It'll be their 3rd one. My own district is trying to do a 5-year cycle when my kids are in. Second time around for them, so it's going to be a difference. More generally, though, we've seen districts go on an 8 to 10 years type cycle, and of course, there are districts out there who just don't really get support regularly.
Right.
And they may have a dry spell for 20 plus years. And so it's really difficult, because what it comes down to is, you know, just like we're sitting here with you, we're trying to figure out, you know, what your opinion is as community members, because that is what really matters. And this work will be sort of shared throughout each session, and hopefully a broader group of your community to sort of see what they're thinking too. This will be a basis for discussion. And you're going to be different than more than half the districts out there, probably a lot more than half. Yeah. So you just kind of answer. What else?
There's, I think it's dead, or it could be dead. The bill in the legislature to reduce the bond passage rate from 60% to 50%. There's one district out there that failed by 1 vote, like literally 1 vote. So what the community can be doing is advocating for our legislators to reduce that pass rate. Everything else is 50%. There's no great reason why school bond should be 60, and that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Huge difference. So that's one thing that we're like I said, I think it's dead for this year, but it might not completely.
I was trying to scroll through,
Yeah, I
but
couldn't
reading it
find
on
it. I
here,
know, I
so
was looking
yeah.
for an update today. It could
Don't
still
think
be
they've
alive,
addressed
so it's
it.
worth an email or two. The other thing is, I think so much of it comes down to messaging. And while we all want our school or our kids' school to be impacted the most, that, you know, I mean, one of the reasons we wanted to do this is really to build community. And we have a couple, I mean, you know, we all were kind of, those of us who were elementary school parents at the time that Northwood was getting built, it's like, oh, there's that bright new shiny school, right? But knowing that it had to be done. And so recognizing that, you know, the time will come, but for the parents that are in the elementary schools now, even if Island Park happens in the next few years, most of the kids are going to be in middle school already. So it's really that messaging of this is benefiting our entire community. We really need to look beyond what we as an individual get, and what does our community get? Because, you know, I mean, do you really want your kid to be sitting through a remodel and then not benefiting from it? So, you know, there's that way of looking at it too. And so I appreciate the argument of equity, and I think to a degree it's really important, but I would hate to see that being decision makers for schools like the middle school that is literally falling down around our kids, and Island Park that is causing such safety issues in our community. And I mean, those are two, I mean, yeah, those are two of my priorities, but those are the reasons. I mean, it's not, neither one is going to benefit my kid at all. She's not going to meet either one of them. So, like I said, I think messaging and us coming in with a united front in terms of here are our priorities, I think is really important.
I would agree. I think that's kind of what the big next efforts is. If when we take this work out to your community, and we're going to go back and just sort of look at this and just sort of make it a slightly more in-depth way to look at the patterns within it. But ideally, we would bring sort of fewer options, and ideally, in the ideal world, one that's really representing sort of your best thinking regarding a preferred approach. And I was a little surprised. You know, I came walking in the room and I was thinking that the middle school was going to be in the first slot in almost everyone's scheme. And so I'm a little surprised that that is not the case, but I also hear all of the discussion behind all the other reasons too. So one of the things I think we're going to try and do next time is continue this conversation and really see if we can start to hash through it and start to get a little more agreement or singularity. We might not get fully there, which is fine, but I think it'd be good as much as we can to take that out to the broader community, because nobody else knows as much about this as you guys do in your community after this. What other things were we at here? Oh, we're right at our time pretty much. So unless there is something burning that you want to share before we leave, I think you've done amazing work for one night. Well, so thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And we're coming back for the final planning meeting, and we'll have some more fun games for you at that. Please come back. Please come back.